She came to Seoul with nothing but a suitcase, a signature, and the desperate hope that selling 1 year of her life might buy her mother's. She never expected to fall in love with the devil. Kwangmin Jai, the ice dragon, ruled Seoul's criminal underworld with a frozen fist and a gaze that made grown men confess sins they hadn't committed yet. He didn't need a wife. He needed a signature on a piece of paper before midnight on his 35th birthday, or everything his grandfather built would bleed out into his cousin's hands. 1 year, separate bedrooms, $500,000. Neither of them planned for what came next. If you're watching this, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you stay until the end, hit that like button, because this story is only getting started. The diagnosis landed on a Thursday. Zuri Bennett had been standing in the hallway outside room 412 at Rush University Medical Center when Dr. Patricia Howe came out with that face, the one Zuri had seen on television, in movies, never once directed at her family. The face that meant the news was the kind that rearranged everything, the kind that made the floor tilt sideways. Stage 4, Dr. Howe said, pancreatic. It spread to the liver. Zuri didn't cry right away. She stood there with her arms crossed over her chest like she could hold herself together through sheer physical pressure, her jaw locked, her eyes doing that thing they always did when she refused to fall apart in public, going very still, very flat, like a body of water before a storm hit it. "What are the options?" she said. Not a question, a demand. Dr. Howe was a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and the careful, practiced compassion of someone who delivered catastrophic news 3 or 4 times a day. She explained it the way doctors explain things to people they know can't fully hear yet. Slowly, clearly, with a kind of deliberate gentleness that somehow made everything worse. Standard chemotherapy, radiation, palliative management, the survival statistics at this stage, given the spread, the quality of life considerations. Zuri listened to all of it and heard exactly one thing. "There's an experimental treatment program," Dr. Howe said, cytolytic immunotherapy. It's shown remarkable results in late-stage pancreatic cases. Complete remission in 31% of participants in the Phase 3 trial. "What does it cost?" Another pause, longer this time. "The full course of treatment, including the hospitalization and monitoring protocol, is approximately $500,000. Insurance carriers haven't approved it yet. There are application processes for financial assistance, but the waiting list is, how long does she have without it?" The doctor's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. 4 to 6 months, possibly less, depending on how quickly the metastasis progresses. Zuri nodded once. "Thank you," she said, and turned and walked back into room 412, where her mother, Gloria Bennett, 58 years old, was propped against 2 hospital pillows with her reading glasses on and a worn paperback mystery novel in her hands, pretending she hadn't heard any of that through the thin hospital door. Gloria looked up when Zuri came in. She had her daughter's same strong jaw, same deep brown eyes, same stubborn set to her mouth that had carried both of them through 20 years of a life that had never once made anything easy. "Well," Gloria said. "Well," Zuri said. They stared at each other for a long moment. "Don't make that face," Gloria said. "I'm not making a face." "You're making the face you make when you've already decided something and you don't want to tell me what it is yet." Zuri pulled the chair up beside the bed and sat down and took her mother's hand, and for a minute neither of them said anything. The machines beeped. Somewhere down the hallway, a television was playing. Outside the window, Chicago kept moving. Buses and horns and wind off the lake, and the relentless indifferent noise of a city that didn't stop for anyone. "We'll figure it out," Zuri said. "Zuri, I said we'll figure it out." Gloria looked at her for a long time with those sharp, tired eyes. Then she squeezed her daughter's hand once and went back to her book, and didn't say anything else, because she knew her daughter well enough to know when there was no point. Wow. 3 weeks later, Zuri had been through everything. She'd called every bank in the Chicago metro area. She'd applied for every medical loan program she could find online, filling out form after form at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning with cold coffee and the spreadsheet she'd built to track every dead end. She'd talked to 3 different financial advisors, 2 of whom had looked at her salary, $28 an hour as a floor manager at a commercial print shop in Wicker Park, and told her, as gently as possible, that there was no conventional path to $500,000 in the time frame they were working with. She'd sold her car. She'd gone through her savings, $12,000 she'd spent 7 years building, and done the math on that number against $500,000, and the math was an obscenity. She'd looked into fundraising, medical crowdfunding, clinical trial applications, emergency charity programs through the hospital. She'd called her uncle in Atlanta, who was the only other family either of them had, and he'd sent $300 in a card that said "praying for you both" in his cramped handwriting, and she'd stared at that card for a long time before putting it on the refrigerator because she didn't have the heart to throw it away. She'd done everything she could think of, and everything she could think of wasn't close to enough. The morning the envelope arrived, she was sitting on the edge of her bed at 6:45 a.m., getting ready for a shift she no longer cared about. The envelope was ivory-colored, thick-papered, with no return address, and her name printed on the front in clean, precise type that didn't look like it came from any ordinary printer. Inside was a single card, cream-colored, 4 sentences. Your financial situation has come to our attention. A solution exists. If you're interested in discussing terms, present yourself at the address below today at 2 p.m. Come alone. Below that, an address on North Michigan Avenue. Below that, a name. Park Soo-yeon, International Legal Affairs. Zuri turned the card over. Nothing on the back. No explanation. No letterhead. No information about who R was or how anyone's attention had been drawn to her situation or what a solution looked like from the perspective of people who printed their correspondence on paper that cost more than her hourly wage. Every reasonable instinct she had told her to throw the card in the trash. She went. The office on Michigan Avenue was on the 14th floor of a building made almost entirely of glass, the kind of building that cost money just to look at. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk staffed by a man in a suit who checked her ID with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to checking the IDs of people who were nervous without knowing exactly why. Park Soo-yeon was waiting for her in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. She was a Korean woman in her mid-40s, small and precisely dressed, with the kind of composed authority that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with stillness. She stood when Zuri came in and extended her hand. "Miss Bennett, thank you for coming." "Who are you?" Zuri said. "I represent a private client." Soo-yeon gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit. I'll stand." A brief pause. Something that might have been approval crossed Soo-yeon's face. "As you like." She sat herself, folded her hands on the table, and looked at Zuri with the steady, assessing calm of someone who had done this before and was not surprised by any of it. "I understand you are in a significant financial crisis related to your mother's medical situation. How do you know that?" "My client has resources. The specifics of how information was gathered are not relevant to what I'm here to offer you." Zuri's jaw tightened. "Okay, so someone has been investigating my personal situation without my knowledge or consent, and now they want to offer me something. That's not concerning at all." "I understand your skepticism. Do you?" "Yes." Soo-yeon didn't blink. "Which is why I would ask you to hear the full offer before you decide. You are, of course, under no obligation to accept anything. You can walk out of this room at any moment." Silence. Zuri pulled out the chair and sat down. "Talk." Soo-yeon opened the leather folio in front of her and laid a single document on the table, face up. She did not slide it toward Zuri. She simply let it sit there. "My client is Kang Min-jae. He is 34 years of age, a South Korean national, and the chief executive of Kang Industries, one of South Korea's largest private conglomerates, with holdings in real estate, technology, logistics, and financial services." She paused. "He is also the controlling authority of an organization that operates outside conventional legal frameworks, which I mentioned because I believe you deserve complete honesty." Zuri went very still. "You're telling me he's a criminal?" "I'm telling you he has significant influence in sectors that operate in legal gray areas. His legitimate business holdings are substantial and are the primary focus of his public profile." "A criminal," Zuri said again. "An extremely powerful man," Soo-yeon said, "with a specific time-sensitive problem." She settled back slightly. "His grandfather, Kang Sung-il, founded both the business empire and the organization that Min-jae now leads. When Sung-il died 14 months ago, he left a will with a conditional provision. Min-jae must be legally married before his 35th birthday, which falls in 6 weeks, or controlling interest in both the legitimate holdings and the organization passes to his cousin Kang Do-hyun. The will was constructed specifically to ensure continuity of leadership through a man who was settled, committed, accountable. Sung-il believed a married man was less likely to make reckless decisions. That's insane! Perhaps it is nonetheless legally binding. Soo-yeon's gaze stayed even. Min-jae has not found a suitable candidate through conventional means. He requires someone who is not connected to Korean social circles, someone whose background is simple to verify, whose motivations are transparent, and who has a compelling reason to comply with contractual terms without complications. Zuri stared at the document on the table. He wants to pay someone to marry him. For 1 year, after which the marriage will be legally dissolved. The inheritance conditions will have been satisfied. You would return to your life here. $500,000. Deposited into an account in your name within 48 hours of the ceremony. The full amount, no installments. The room felt very quiet. Outside, 14 floors below, the city kept moving, indifferent and constant and enormous. What does it involve? Zuri said. Her voice was flat. She was thinking about her mother's hands on that paperback novel, pretending she hadn't heard. You would reside in Min-jae's sole residence for the duration, separate accommodations within the household. You would be required to attend a limited number of public and social events as his wife. No physical obligations beyond what is necessary for public presentation, formal appearances, photographs, that manner of thing. A comprehensive legal contract governs every aspect of the arrangement, including provisions for your protection and a confidentiality agreement. If he's who you say he is, Zuri said slowly, then I'd be living in the home of a man who runs a criminal organization, in a country where I don't know anyone, in a situation where my safety depends on the goodwill of a man I've never met. Your safety would be contractually and physically guaranteed. Min-jae's interest is in fulfilling his grandfather's conditions. He has no interest in complications. Soo-yeon paused. I have personally reviewed every provision of this contract. I have negotiated on behalf of the arrangement for 4 months. I would not present it to you if I believed it placed you in genuine danger. You work for him. I represent his legal interests, yes. I'm also a woman who has been in this profession for 20 years, and I have seen enough to know when an arrangement is genuinely what it presents itself to be. A pause. This one is. Zuri looked down at the document. She didn't touch it. I need to see my mother, she said. Today, before I decide anything. Of course. And I want a copy of the contract, every page. I want 48 hours. 24, Soo-yeon said. Given the timeline. Zuri looked up at her. 24, she said. Fine. She drove to Rush in a rental car. Her own was already sold, and sat with her mother for 3 hours that afternoon, not saying anything about the meeting on Michigan Avenue, just sitting. Gloria was having a hard day, the kind where the nausea from the preliminary treatment rounds had her quiet and gray-faced against the pillow, not reaching for the mystery novel, just lying there with her eyes half closed while the IV dripped. At one point, Zuri got up and stood at the window, looking out at the parking structure and the flat gray Chicago sky, and thought about what she was actually considering. She was considering flying to Seoul, marrying a stranger who ran a criminal empire, living in his house for a year. She was considering selling, not her time, not her skills, not her labor, herself, her name, her legal identity, the fundamental fact of who she was and what her life meant. She was considering doing that for money. She thought about her father, who had left when she was 11, and who she hadn't spoken to in 9 years, and whether he would have made the same choice. She thought it was probably irrelevant since he'd never been the kind of person who made choices for other people's sake. She thought about Gloria at 31, raising her alone on a teacher's salary, and a ferocious, undefeated refusal to accept less than she deserved, and what that woman would say about the envelope that was sitting in Zuri's bag right now. She thought her mother would tell her not to do it. She thought her mother would be wrong. When visiting hours ended, she kissed Gloria on the forehead and told her she'd be back tomorrow. Gloria caught her hand as she turned to go. Zuri? I'm fine, Ma. Whatever you're thinking about doing, I'm fine. Gloria held her hand for a second longer, searching her face with those sharp eyes. Then she let go. Zuri walked to her car and sat in the parking structure for 20 minutes in the dark, reading the contract on her phone. Soo-yeon had sent a digital copy, going through each provision with the dogged, methodical focus she'd learned from years of managing production schedules and catching the errors that other people missed. The contract was thorough, exhaustingly thorough. Every contingency she could think of was addressed. The payment provision was ironclad, notarized, escrow protected, triggered automatically upon completion of the legal ceremony. The separation of living arrangements was explicitly stated. The boundaries of expected public conduct were detailed down to the number of required social appearances per month. A full security protocol was outlined, including a dedicated personal security officer who would report to her directly, not to Min Jae. There was a clause that allowed her to terminate and leave Seoul at any time if she felt her physical safety was compromised, with the payment reduced proportionally to the duration of her stay, but guaranteed at no less than 40% of the total, $200,000, regardless of when she left. It was, she realized with a strange, hollow feeling, actually a well-written contract. It was written by someone who understood that the person signing it needed to trust it. She called her friend Denise at 9:30 that night and said, without explaining why, "If I did something completely insane for the right reasons, would that make it less insane?" "Depends on the reasons," Denise said. "My mother," a long pause. "Then no," Denise said quietly. "It wouldn't." Zuri stared at the ceiling of her car. "Yeah," she said, "that's what I thought. She drove home and sat at her kitchen table and read the contract twice more, and then called the number Soo-yeon had left her. "I'll do it," she said when Soo-yeon picked up. "I'll begin the arrangements. I have conditions." "We expected that. Send them to me by 7 a.m., and I'll have responses to you by noon." They negotiated for the better part of the next 18 hours. Zuri working her way through every point she'd flagged in the contract, pushing for clearer language on the security provisions, a stronger exit clause, a stipulation that she'd have access to an independent legal representative in Seoul at all times, and Soo-yeon met her on every significant point without visible resistance, which told Zuri two things. One, that Min Jae genuinely needed this arrangement to work. Two, that Park Soo-yeon was a professional who respected the negotiation. She told her mother the morning of her flight, 3 days later. She didn't tell her everything. She said she'd taken a consulting contract in Seoul, a year-long engagement, very well paid. It would cover the treatment and then some. Gloria looked at her for a very long time. "What kind of consulting?" she said. "Corporate liaison work." Zuri had practiced this. Her voice was steady. "For a Korean conglomerate. It's legitimate, Ma. I've seen the legal documentation." "Zuri, look me in the eye and tell me this is safe." She looked her mother in the eye. "It's safe," she said. She didn't know if that was true, but she said it like it was. Gloria reached up and touched her daughter's face with both hands, a thing she hadn't done since Zuri was very small, and held her there for a moment. "You come home," she said. "You hear me. Whatever happens over there, you come home." "I will," Zuri said. "I promise." She got on the plane that evening, 14 hours over the Pacific, sitting in a business class seat she'd never sat in before, watching the map on the screen in front of her and thinking about the word wife, and what it meant when it was a line item in a legal contract. She didn't sleep. She watched Chicago shrink into the darkness behind her and Seoul grow slowly in the darkness ahead, and she thought about her mother's hands on her face and the feel of that promise in her mouth, and she held on to it like it was the only solid thing she had. Because it was. Incheon Airport at 6 in the morning was enormous and bright and very cold, the air carrying the particular institutional chill of a massive transit space that had been climate-controlled for thousands of people it didn't particularly care about. Zuri cleared customs with her single rolling suitcase and a carry-on and found, on the other side of the gate, a man in a black suit holding a card with her name on it. He was not Min Jae. He was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 30s, with the flat, watchful expression of someone paid to observe and not to comment. He introduced himself as Park Jin-woo, head of residential security, and he said it in careful, precise English with a slight accent. "Mr. Kang is not available to meet you at this time," Jinwoo said, taking her suitcase with the kind of efficiency that didn't ask permission. "He will see you at the residence this evening." "Okay," Zuri said. She followed him to a black SUV with tinted windows parked in a restricted lane outside the terminal. There was a second vehicle behind it, also black, also tinted. She got into the first one and looked out the window as Seoul opened up around her. Elevated highways above the Han River, clusters of high-rise apartment buildings, highways thick with morning traffic, the city enormous and gray-green and alive in the early light. She pressed her back into the seat and watched it come. She thought, "I'm really here." And then, because she was Zuri Bennett, and she had learned a long time ago that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, she thought, okay, what's next? That. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a residential tower in Gangnam-gu, a building that from the outside looked like pure architecture, all glass and steel and angles, the kind of structure that communicated wealth not through decoration, but through the sheer confident expense of its design. The elevator required a key card. The lobby required a second security check. Jinwoo moved through both with the ease of someone who lived in this environment, and Zuri moved through it with her spine straight and her face neutral and her heart beating about 20% faster than she would have liked. The penthouse doors opened into a space that stopped her for just a moment despite herself. It was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, the city spread below in every direction. She could see the Han River to the south, the Namsan Tower on the hill to the north, the endless organized grid of one of Asia's largest cities laid out around them like a circuit board. The interior was stark and deliberate. Dark floors, minimal furniture, everything chosen for precision rather than comfort. Art on the walls that she didn't know enough about to name, but that clearly cost more than she made in a decade. No clutter, no personal photographs, no evidence of a human life. It looked like a very expensive stage set. A woman was waiting for her inside. Her name was Kim Hye-jin. She was Min Jae's household manager. She spoke English with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this job for a long time and had no particular opinions about any of it. She showed Zuri to her suite. It was on the west side of the upper floor, large, with its own bathroom and a walk-in closet and windows overlooking a rooftop terrace, and informed her that she had access to the kitchen, the gym on the lower floor, and the terrace, and that she was not to go beyond the main residential floors without an escort. "Mr. Kang will meet with you in the main study at 8 p.m., Hyejin said. "Is there anything you require before then?" "Sleep," Zuri said. "Of course." Hyejin left. Zuri stood in the center of her new room and looked at it. The bed with its crisp white linens, the expensive emptiness of everything, the city visible through the windows like a threat she hadn't fully parsed yet. And then she sat down on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands for 60 seconds and let herself feel exactly how terrified she was. 60 seconds. Then she straightened up, took a shower, and lay down and slept for 5 hours, because she needed to be sharp tonight, and she was not going to meet the ice dragon running on empty. He was already in the study when Hyejin brought her there at 8. Zuri had prepared herself. She'd read what she could find online, and she'd found more than she expected. Because Min Jae was a public figure in the legitimate sense, profiled in Korean business publications, photographed at industry events, mentioned in articles about corporate consolidation and the shifting landscape of Korean conglomerates. The photos showed a man who was striking in the impersonal way of someone who'd had good genetics and understood how to carry himself. Tall, well-dressed, dark-featured, with an expression in every photograph that communicated the same thing. "I am not here for your entertainment." The man in the study was different from the photographs, and also exactly the same. He was standing at the window with his back to the door when she came in, looking out at the city below, and he didn't turn immediately. He was in dark trousers and a gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up, which was somehow more disconcerting than a suit would have been. There was something about the casual precision of it that communicated that this was a man who was always in control of how he presented himself, even in his own home at 8 in the evening. When he turned, she looked at his face and understood, in a way she hadn't quite from the photographs, why people were afraid of him. It wasn't any individual feature. It was the combination, the stillness of his expression, The way his eyes moved to her face and stayed there with a focused, measuring attention that had no warmth in it and no attempt at warmth, no social lubrication, no performance of engagement. He looked at her the way a person might look at a document they were trying to determine the validity of. "Zuri Bennett," he said. His English was precise, slightly formal, heavily accented. "Kang Min Jai," she said. He studied her for another moment. Then he moved to the sitting area, 2 chairs and a low table, a tray with tea things on it, and sat and waited. She sat across from him. Neither of them touched the tea. "You've read the contract," he said. "Every word. And you have questions." "A few." "Ask them." She looked at him across the table. His face was entirely closed. There was no hostility in it, no warmth, no visible emotion of any kind, just that measuring attention, patient and absolute. "The public events," she said. "The contract specifies 8 per month. I want to know what that looks like in practice. Business dinners, charity galas, family obligations, social engagements where my marital status will be noted." A pause. "You will be expected to behave as a wife, dress appropriately, remain by my side, say little or say the right things if you do speak. I will brief you before each event on who will be there and what is expected." "I'm not going to say little," Zuri said. "I'll be appropriate. I won't undermine anything, but I'm not going to pretend to be less than I am." Something shifted in his expression. Not much. Just a slight, almost imperceptible recalibration. "Fine," he said. "The security arrangements. Jin Woo. Does he report to you or to me?" "He reports to both. His first obligation in matters of your physical safety is to you. His first obligation in matters of household security is to me. There is no conflict between those two things." "What if I believe there is?" A pause. "Then we address it as it comes. I'd like a clearer provision than that." "The contract is clear. His primary obligation in safety matters is your protection." His voice was flat and patient, the voice of someone who had answered practical questions in difficult situations before and didn't find the difficulty interesting. "If you have concerns about specific scenarios, raise them with Su-Yan and she will amend the language." Zuri noted that. She looked at him again. The closed face, the measured stillness, the absolute absence of any apparent interest in her as a person rather than a practical problem that needed solving. "One more thing," she said. He waited. "My mother. The treatment. If something happens to the payment, if there's a legal challenge to the will or complications with the inheritance, or anything that affects the financial arrangements, what happens to the money I've already received? It is yours, unconditionally. Whatever happens to the inheritance dispute, whatever happens to any legal challenge, the money in your account is legally protected. It cannot be clawed back. It cannot be disputed." He said it without hesitation, without the slight formality that had colored some of his other answers. The flatness of it was different, more absolute, like a fact rather than a provision. "Your mother's treatment is not contingent on any outcome of my family's arrangements." Zuri looked at him. She had expected a man who was frightening because of his power, the way powerful people were frightening. She had not expected the particular quality of his stillness, the sense that whatever was happening inside him was happening at a great distance from the surface, behind something that had been built over a long time and maintained with considerable effort. She thought briefly about what Su-Yan had told her. His parents during a gang war, 16 years old. She'd read it in the briefing material Su-Yan had provided, and she'd noted it the way you noted a detail that might be important later. She thought she probably understood something about the distance behind his eyes, even if she didn't understand the specifics of what had created it. "Okay," she said. "The ceremony is the day after tomorrow," Min-jae said. "It will take place at the district registry office. 15 minutes. No guests beyond the legally required witnesses. You will be introduced to my household staff as my wife the following morning. By the end of that week, your presence here will have been noted by the necessary parties." "His cousin," Zuri said. Something in his jaw tightened, barely visible. "Among others." "What's his problem with you exactly?" A pause, longer this time. "That is not relevant to the contract." "It might be relevant to my safety." He looked at her for a moment with that measuring attention. Then, "Do-hyun believes he is better suited to lead than I am. He has spent the last 14 months building alliances within the organization and among the corporate board based on the premise that my grandfather's will can be successfully challenged. A beat. He is wrong. The will is ironclad, but he will not accept that without a fight. And the marriage satisfies the final condition and removes his last viable challenge. Unless he can prove the marriage is fake. The slight pause again. Yes. Which is why you need someone who doesn't already have connections to soul. Someone who looks like a genuine choice. Someone whose background is clean enough that when Do-hyun investigates, she watched his face. And he will investigate. He already is, Min-jae said quietly. He can't find the contract. The contract is legally protected. Attorney-client privilege governs its existence. There is no legitimate mechanism by which Do-hyun can obtain it. There are other mechanisms, Zuri said. He looked at her with the first hint of something that wasn't quite the flat measuring calculation, something that sat just behind his eyes for a second and then was gone. Yes, he said. There are. The room was quiet. Outside the enormous windows, Seoul glittered, cold and vast and indifferent. Zuri looked at the man across from her and thought, this is the person whose name I'm going to carry for a year. This is the life I'm stepping into. This stranger in his expensive home with his empty face and his brutal empire and his eyes that look like they were built to keep people out. She thought about her mother's hands on her face. You come home. I'll be ready, she said, day after tomorrow. Min-jae nodded once. It was a gesture of dismissal rather than acknowledgement. She could see the difference, and she stood and went to the door. Miss Bennett. She stopped. He was still seated, looking toward the window rather than at her now. The contract is real, he said. I do not make agreements I do not intend to honor. She stood there a moment. Neither do I, she said. She left him there in the dark study with the city behind him and walked back through the vast, silent penthouse to her suite and locked the door and stood in the dark room with her back against it for a long time, breathing. She had done it. She was here. In 48 hours, she was going to marry the most dangerous man in Seoul. And somewhere in this building, behind that closed, formidable face, there was a person she didn't know yet. She was almost certain, standing there in the dark, listening to her own heartbeat, that that was the most dangerous thing about this entire arrangement. Not the organization, not the cousin, not the empire or the enemies or the legal complexity. The person. She turned on the light and went to bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, 1 year, just 1 year. She was still thinking it when sleep finally came for her, quiet and dreamless, at the edge of a city that hadn't decided yet whether it would swallow her whole. The wedding happened on a cold Tuesday morning in November. The district registry office was a municipal building in Jongno-gu, fluorescent lighting, linoleum floors, a waiting area with plastic chairs, and a bored clerk behind a window. The kind of place where marriages were processed rather than celebrated. It smelled like paper and cleaning solution, and the particular administrative weariness of a government office that had seen too many people come through its doors with too many different kinds of hope. Min-jae arrived first. He was in a dark suit, no tie, his face doing the thing it always did, that composed, impenetrable stillness. But there was something in the set of his jaw that she couldn't read. Soo-yeon was with him. 2 other individuals who served as legal witnesses stood slightly apart. Zuri came in, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and they were both very still for a moment. She had dressed carefully. A fitted charcoal blazer over a deep burgundy dress. Not bridal, not even close, but composed. Deliberate. She had done her hair and her makeup with the same methodical care she brought to everything that mattered, because she had decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to do it on her own terms. And her own terms meant she walked into this room looking like herself and not like someone playing a part. Min-jae's eyes moved over her face for a moment. He said nothing. The ceremony took 11 minutes, not 15. The clerk spoke in Korean, Soo-yeon translated in low murmurs beside her, and Zuri answered at the right moments, her voice steady, her hand still, the pen in her hand scratching across the document with a finality that she felt in her chest rather than heard. When it was over, the clerk stamped the registration, offered a perfunctory smile, and moved on to the next filing. Minjae and Zuri walked out of the building into the November cold. The sky was low and white, the street quiet in the early morning. They stood on the steps for a moment, side by side, not touching. Zuri looked out at the street. A married woman. She had become a married woman in a room that smelled like cleaning solution while a stranger stood beside her and the city went about its business on the other side of the windows. She thought, Ma, I did it. I'm doing it. The money's coming. She thought, please let this work. Beside her, Min-jae was looking straight ahead. His profile was clean and still against the white sky, and there was something in it, some quality she couldn't name and didn't trust herself to name, that made her look away. The car will take you back to the residence, he said. I have meetings this afternoon. Okay, she said. He moved toward the vehicle waiting at the curb, paused. The deposit will clear by end of business today, he said, without turning around. Check your account. Then he got into the car and was gone. She stood on the steps for another moment, alone. Then she took out her phone and started composing a message to the treatment coordinator at Rush University Medical Center, the one she'd been in contact with for weeks, who had told her to call when the funds were confirmed. Her hands were completely steady. Her eyes were not. She sent the message. She put the phone away. She had a year to get through. She didn't know yet what that year would cost her. Standing on the steps of a municipal building in Seoul with a new surname she hadn't yet learned to hear as hers, she didn't know yet that before that year was out, she would be asked to pay in a currency she hadn't known she was carrying, the kind you can only spend once and can never get back. The money cleared at 4:57 p.m. on a Tuesday. Zuri was sitting on the floor of her suite with her back against the bed frame and her laptop open across her knees when the notification came through, a number with 6 figures that she had been working toward for 3 months and that now existed in an account with her name on it, real and solid and undeniable, like a door that had finally opened after she'd been throwing herself against it until her shoulders bled. She stared at the number for a long time. Then she called the treatment coordinator at Rush, and when the woman picked up, Zuri said, "The funds are confirmed, full amount. How fast can we start?" "If we receive the transfer confirmation by end of week, we can begin the intake protocol next Monday," the coordinator said. "Dr. Howe will want to speak with your mother first thing tomorrow." "She'll be ready," Zuri said. Tell her it's done." She hung up. She sat on the floor of a penthouse in Seoul that belonged to a man she'd been legally married to for 8 hours, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed slowly until the pressure behind her eyes receded to something manageable. One call to her mother, brief. She said the contract had come through, said the treatment was starting, said everything was fine. Gloria was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. "You sound tired," she said finally. 14-hour flight, Ma." Another pause. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm sure." She wasn't sure, but she said it the way she always said things she needed to be true. She went to bed at 9 and lay awake until 2 in the morning listening to the city below, horns and distance and the low, constant hum of soul existing at scale, and thought about the 11 minutes in the registry office and the way Min-jae had said check your account without turning around, like an employer confirming that payroll had processed, and about the feeling that had settled into her chest somewhere on the steps of that building and hadn't left yet. She didn't have a name for it. She decided she didn't need one. She was here to survive a year, not to understand it. Take. The first 2 weeks established the geography of avoidance. Min-jae left before 7 every morning. She heard him sometimes, footsteps on the floor above, the low exchange of voices between him and Jin Woo, the sound of the elevator. But she never saw him before evening, and some evenings she didn't see him at all. Hyejin informed her, without apology, that Mr. Kang's schedule was demanding and that his hours were not predictable. Zuri said she understood, and she did, and she was also aware that she was relieved, and was also aware that she didn't entirely trust the relief. She established her own routine. She ran in the building's gym at 6:30 every morning, a punishing hour on the treadmill that she used to burn off the excess energy of a mind that didn't know how to stop working. She ate breakfast alone in the kitchen, which was staffed by a cook named Mr. O, who spoke no English, but who communicated through a combination of gestures and expressions that he had strong opinions about what constituted a proper breakfast. and that Zuri's habit of eating only toast was, in his view, an act of personal negligence. She downloaded Korean language apps and spent 2 hours every afternoon working through them with the same methodical stubbornness she brought to every skill she'd decided to acquire. She took walks in the neighborhood when Jin-woo cleared it. He always accompanied her, one step behind and slightly to her left, with the practiced invisibility of a bodyguard who knew his job, and she learned the shape of Gangnam-gu one block at a time, the coffee shops and the convenience stores, and the particular quality of Seoul's light in November, pale and thin and cutting. She did not think about Min-jae more than was necessary. She mostly succeeded. Chip. The first real confrontation happened on a Thursday evening, 17 days in. She came back from a walk at 6:30 to find Min-jae already home, which was unusual. Standing in the kitchen with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, reviewing something on his tablet with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Mr. O was moving around him with practiced efficiency, producing food that smelled extraordinary, and Min-jae was reading and not eating, which Mr. O was also visibly unhappy about. Zuri stopped in the doorway. Min-jae looked up. "There's a dinner tomorrow night," he said. It came out like a briefing rather than an announcement. Kim Tae-young. He's on the corporate board of Kang Industries. His wife is Ji-soo. They will expect a couple who are recently married. A slight pause on the last two words, the faintest edge of something she couldn't quite categorize. "Okay," Zuri said. "What do I need to know?" He set the tablet down. Tae-young is 62, conservative. He values hierarchy and decorum. He will ask you questions about yourself, your background, how we met, why you chose to come to Seoul. I need you to answer consistently with the story we've established. Which is, we met through a mutual professional connection 8 months ago. You were working on an international contract with a logistics firm that does business with one of my subsidiaries. We maintained contact. It became personal. Zuri absorbed this. That's thin. It doesn't need to be elaborate. It needs to be consistent. Thin stories fall apart under follow-up questions. Something tightened slightly in his expression. Then don't give him room for follow-up questions. I'm telling you it's thin. Her voice was flat, not confrontational, just stating a fact. If this man decides to probe the timeline, there are holes. We should have more detail. Min-jae looked at her for a moment. His jaw was tight. It was the expression of someone who was accustomed to having their assessments accepted. Such as, he said, such as, where specifically? What was the name of the logistics firm? What was the project? What was the first thing we said to each other? What did I think of Seoul the first time I visited? You're asking me to perform 8 months of a relationship in front of a man who is apparently sharp enough to sit on the board of a major conglomerate. Give me better material to work with. Silence. Mr. O moved quietly between them, resolutely not looking at either of them. Min-jae pulled out a chair at the kitchen counter and sat, and for the next 40 minutes, they built a story. He answered her questions with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to strategic planning, filling in the framework she'd identified as weak. And she pushed back on every point that felt false or thin. And he listened to her pushback with a focused attention that she noted was different from dismissal. He didn't dismiss her. He adjusted. Not easily. Not without that particular stiffness that she was coming to recognize as Min-jae's version of reluctance. The small pauses before he conceded a point, the slight recalibration of his expression. But he adjusted. When they finished, they had a story that she could actually stand behind. "Better," she said. "You've done this kind of preparation before," he said. "Production scheduling, same principle. You identify every point where something can go wrong and you close it before it does." She looked at him across the counter. "What time tomorrow?" 7 p.m. "A car will take us at 6:30. She nodded and stood. "Ms. Bennett?" She stopped. He was looking at the counter, not at her. "In future, if you have a strategic objection, raise it. Don't simply state the conclusion without the reasoning." She turned and looked at him. "I gave you the reasoning. At the end, after I'd already—" He stopped. His jaw moved. "I prefer to have the information in sequence." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "And if you have a problem with something I'm doing, tell me directly instead of delivering instructions like I'm on your payroll." The The silence that followed was the particular kind that has weight. "You are," he started. "I know what the contract says." She met his eyes. "I also know the difference between an employee and a wife, even a fake one. If you want this to be convincing, you need to treat me like the second thing, even when we're not in public." She left before he could answer. She heard, as she reached the hallway, the sound of a chair shifting and then nothing, and she kept walking, her heart going a little faster than she wanted it to. The dinner was a performance, and she knew how to perform. The Kim residence was in a tower in Apgujeong, a formal apartment, the kind decorated to impress rather than to live in, all clean lines and serious art, and a dining table that sat 12. Tae-young Kim was exactly as Min-jae had described. 62, conservative, the kind of man who shook hands at the exact right pressure and whose eyes were sharper than his polite expression suggested. His wife Jisoo was warm in a practiced way, the warmth of someone who had spent decades being the gracious counterpoint to a difficult man. Min-jae had done something with himself for the evening that Zuri noticed immediately, a different kind of stillness. He was still guarded, still controlled, but the particular quality of his attention had shifted. There was a social performance happening at the surface of him, a competent charm that she hadn't seen before, the version of him that existed in boardrooms and business dinners. Polished, present, still dangerous but dressed differently. He introduced her as his wife. His hand went to the small of her back for a moment as they came in. Brief, light, practiced, and she felt it land and reminded herself it meant nothing and that the reminder was necessary. She talked to Jisoo about Chicago. She talked to Tae-young about logistics networks and international supply chains in a way that made him visibly reassess her, which she had intended. When he asked about how she and Min-jae had met, she told the story they'd built with exactly the right proportion of detail to vagueness, natural and specific where it needed to be specific, and she watched Tae-young's sharp eyes and saw them accept it and move on. Min-jae was watching her from across the table. Not constantly, not obviously, but she caught it twice. The particular quality of attention, the way his gaze moved to her face when she spoke and didn't immediately move away. And both times she looked back at him and held it for exactly a second before returning her attention to Tae-young, because she was in a performance, and the performance required the right behavior, and the right behavior was a wife who noticed her husband noticing her. On the ride home, they sat in the back of the car in silence. The city moved past the windows. "Tae-young believes it," Min-jae said eventually. "I know. You changed the logistics story slightly, added the detail about the Incheon port backup. It played more real with the specific location, logistically accurate, so he couldn't contradict it." A pause. "Where did you know to put that?" "I managed shipping contract relationships for 3 years at my previous job. I know what port logistics actually sounds like when people talk about it." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know that." "You didn't ask." The car moved through the night. "The contract has your employment history," he said. "My job title. Not what the job actually involved." She looked out the window. "There's a difference." He didn't say anything else, but she was aware, in the particular inconvenient way she'd been trying to be unaware of for 17 days, that he was looking at her profile in the dark of the car, and that the look had a quality to it that was different from the measuring assessment of their first meeting. She didn't know what to do with that. She decided to do nothing. Do-hyun came to the penthouse on a Sunday morning 3 weeks after the wedding. She hadn't met him yet. She'd heard his name, from Min-jae, from Soo-yeon, in the briefing materials she'd been given before the move. She knew what he was, the rival, the threat, the man who believed the marriage was a transaction and intended to prove it. Knowing all of that did not fully prepare her for the reality of him. Kang Do-hyun was 31 years old and had Min-jae's height without Min-jae's weight. A lean, physical elegance that he wore the way some men wore watches, as a communication. His face was openly handsome in a way Min-jae's wasn't. There was nothing guarded about it, nothing closed. It was the face of a man who had decided long ago that openness was a more effective weapon than distance. He arrived without being announced, which told her something about the household's tolerance for his behavior or its fear of it. Hyejin came to the terrace where Zuri was reading and said, with a carefully neutral expression, that Mr. Do-hyun was in the main room. Zuri put down her book. She walked in. Do-hyun was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned when she came in. His expression did the thing she'd already clocked. The open, easy warmth, the slight smile that was the opposite of Min Jae's stillness. And he extended his hand. "Zuri Bennett," he said, "I've wanted to meet you." His English was flawless, barely accented. Educated abroad, she remembered from the briefing. Cambridge, then Yale Law. She shook his hand. Do Hyun. No honorific, no Mr. Kang. She watched his eyes react to that. A slight flicker, quickly controlled. "Min Jae told you about me," he said. "He mentioned a cousin." "Is that all?" The smile stayed. "He undersells things. It's always been his weakness." He looked around the room with the studied casualness of a man performing relaxation. "You've settled in well. How are you finding Seoul?" "Cold," she said. "But interesting." His eyes came back to her face. "And the marriage? Also interesting?" "Most things worth having are." He laughed. A genuine laugh, actually. She heard something real in it, something that surprised her slightly, because she'd expected the performance to be cheaper. "You're sharp," he said. "I like that." Min Jae tends to surround himself with people who agree with him. It's not healthy. "Is that why you're here? His mental health?" Do Hyun smiled. "I'm here because we're family. I try to maintain a relationship even when it isn't always welcomed." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm also here because I'm curious. My cousin has been private about this relationship, which isn't unusual for him. But the timing is interesting, don't you think? 6 weeks before his 35th birthday, a wife who appeared quite suddenly in the public record." Zuri looked at him. She thought, "There it is." She said, "What are you actually asking me?" The smile adjusted, became something more direct. "I'm asking whether you're happy," he said. "Whether this is what it looks like." "What does it look like?" "A real marriage," he said. "To a real woman who chose to be here because she wanted to be." "Then that's what it is." The silence between them was a different quality than the silences she had with Min Jae. With Min Jae, the silence had weight and texture, the silence of two people navigating around something that neither would name. With Do Hyun, the silence was tactical, two people assessing each other's positions. "I hope so," Do Hyun said, and the warmth in his voice was so well constructed that it was almost convincing. "I genuinely do. My cousin deserves something real." He paused. "We all do." He left 10 minutes later, having accepted the tea she'd offered and drunk half of it while making comfortable conversation about Seoul's restaurant scene, as though the first conversation hadn't happened at all. She stood at the window and watched the elevator close behind him. Then she called Min Jae. He picked up on the second ring. Background noise. He was somewhere loud, a meeting or a restaurant. "Your cousin just left the penthouse," she said. A pause. The background noise shifted, receded. He'd moved somewhere quieter. "What did he say?" "He was polite. He was also absolutely fishing." She kept her voice flat. "He didn't get anything, but he's watching. He came here in person to look at me, to assess whether I'm performing or real. He knows the difference." "What did you tell him?" "What we agreed. Nothing more." She paused. "He's smart, Min Jae. Whatever you've planned for him, don't underestimate how smart he is." The silence from his end was a different kind, the thinking kind. "He doesn't know about the contract," he said finally. "He suspects. That's almost worse." "I know." "Then do something about it." She hung up. She stood at the window for a while longer, looking at the city, feeling the specific exhaustion of having been vigilant for an hour in a room with a man who was looking for a crack to put his hand through. She was tired. She was also, and this was the thing she didn't want to think about, angry. Not at Do Hyun specifically. At the situation, the architecture of it, the way it required her to perform and defend and calculate every interaction, the way even a Sunday morning reading on the terrace could become a terrain she had to navigate. She was angry at the contract. She was angry at herself for signing it. She was angry, more quietly and more dangerously, at the fact that it was getting harder to remember that the man whose name she wore was a stranger. Tim. She found out about Min Jae's parents on a Wednesday night, by accident. She'd been in the study, Min Jae's study, which Hyejin had told her she had access to for the household's reference library, looking for a specific book she'd seen on the shelf the first night. It was late, close to 11, and the penthouse was quiet. She'd thought Min Jae was working in the lower office, which is where he usually was at this hour. He was in the study. He didn't hear her come in, or he heard her and didn't respond, which she realized later was more likely. And he was sitting in the chair by the window in the dark with a glass of something that wasn't tea, and on the table beside him was a photograph. She stopped in the doorway. He turned his head. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know you were—" "It's fine." He didn't move. His voice was even, but there was something in it, a quality she hadn't heard before, something rougher at the edge of the evenness. She should have left. She didn't. "Is that a family photograph?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the photograph. "My parents," he said. "This was taken in Busan. I was 12. A pause. "They were killed 4 years after this was taken, during a conflict between my grandfather's organization and a rival group out of Incheon." The room was very quiet. "They weren't involved in the organization," he said. "My father worked in shipping administration. My mother taught elementary school." His voice was completely flat, the way a voice goes flat when the emotion has been under that surface for so long it's become structural. It was not a targeted attack. It was careless. The people who ordered it didn't consider collateral damage worth considering. Zuri didn't say anything. She had learned over the years the difference between silences that needed filling and silences that needed to be held. "My grandfather brought me to Seoul," he said. "He was not a warm man, but he was clear about what he was building and why, and he made sure I understood both." His jaw moved. "I've thought for 20 years about whether what he built was worth what it cost." "And?" she said quietly. He looked at her. His face in the dark was something she didn't have a framework for yet. Open in a way she hadn't seen it, but not in Do-hyun's easy, practiced way. Open the way a crack in a structure is open. "I haven't decided," he said. She stood in the doorway for another moment, then she said, "I'll come back for the book tomorrow," and left him there in the dark, and walked back to her suite, and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. She was aware, with a clarity that felt like the beginning of something she couldn't stop, that the man in the study was not what she'd signed up for. She'd signed up for the ice dragon, the contract, the transaction. She had not signed up for a 12-year-old boy in a photograph taken in Busan 4 years before his world ended. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. 1 year, she thought, just 1 year. The thought was already starting to feel like a lie she was telling herself to avoid a truth she wasn't ready to hold. The gala invitation arrived on a Friday, 4 weeks after the wedding. Soo-yeon delivered it personally. A formal event, the Kong Industries' annual charity gala, the most significant social event of Min Jae's public calendar year. Politicians, corporate leaders, celebrities, underworld figures in expensive suits pretending to be only the first two. 400 guests. A ballroom in the Grand Hyatt. "Everyone will be watching you," Soo-yeon said. She was seated across from Zuri in the living room, her folio open, her expression the careful, professional neutral she always wore. "Not just Do-hyun. Everyone who has an opinion about Min Jae's marriage will be watching how you conduct yourself." "I know," Zuri said. "Do-hyun will be there. He has been—" Soo-yeon paused. "He has been making inquiries, specific ones. Our legal team has received indications that he is attempting to obtain financial records related to certain accounts." The room felt very still. "My account," Zuri said. Soo-yeon's expression remained neutral. "The account the payment was transferred to, yes, he has not succeeded. The legal protections are— but he's looking." "Yes." Zuri looked at her. "How close is he?" "Not close enough to cause immediate concern." A pause that lasted slightly too long. "But the gala will be an opportunity for him. He will be looking for a moment, a weakness, something he can use publicly. In front of 400 people." "In front of 400 people," Soo-yeon confirmed. Zuri sat with that for a moment. She thought about Do-hyun's face in this living room 4 weeks ago. The easy smile. The Yale Law precision behind the warmth. The specific quality of a man who had been calculating the moment for a long time and was waiting for it to arrive. Does Min Jae know how close Do-hyun's investigation has gotten? He knows. And? He believes the legal protections will hold. Soo-yeon's voice was careful. "I believe they will hold. I also believe—" She stopped. Say it, Zuri said. I believe Do-hyun doesn't need the contract itself. If he can find someone at the gala who will say publicly that this marriage does not appear genuine, if he can manufacture enough doubt in front of the right people, the legal challenge becomes possible regardless of whether he has documentation. Zuri felt something cold settle in her chest. He's not going for the evidence, she said. He's going for the narrative. Yes. She stood up and walked to the window. 4 weeks. She'd been here 4 weeks and they were already at this point. She thought about the dinner with Tae-young and Ji-soo and the story she'd held together in that room. She thought about Do-hyun's careful, pleasant smile. She thought about Min-jae and his study in the dark with the photograph from Busan. She thought about her mother, who by now had completed the first week of treatment, who had called her Thursday to say that the medical team was cautiously optimistic, who had said you sound different in a tone of voice that Zuri had deflected from without quite knowing why. She turned from the window. What do I need to do for the gala? She said. Soo-yeon looked at her with the first hint of something that might have been relief underneath the professional composure. Be exactly what you have been, she said. Present, composed, convincing. A pause. And stay close to Min-jae. Zuri nodded. Soo-yeon left. Zuri stood in the empty living room and thought about staying close to Min-jae and what that was going to cost her, and whether the thing she felt when she was near him was something she could continue to call nothing. She thought, the gala is in 3 days. She thought, Do-hyun has been building to this for months. She thought, Min-jae doesn't know everything Do-hyun has, and I might not either. And she thought, whatever's going to happen in that ballroom, it's already in motion, and the only direction is forward, and there is no version of forward that doesn't ask something of me that the contract never accounted. The night of the gala, Zuri stood in front of the mirror in her suite for 4 minutes without moving. The dress was deep emerald. Soo-yeon had arranged it, a Korean designer whose name Zuri couldn't pronounce, structured at the shoulder and clean through the body, the kind of garment that had opinions about the person wearing it. She'd done her own makeup. Her hair was up. She looked, she thought, exactly like what she was supposed to look like, a woman who belonged in this life. She thought about how dangerous that was. Jinwoo knocked at 6:15. She picked up her small clutch, checked that her phone was inside, and walked out. Min-jae was waiting in the main room. He was in a dark suit, black, precisely cut, no tie. And when he turned and looked at her, something moved through his expression so quickly she almost didn't catch it. Almost. He caught himself. The stillness came back. You look... He stopped, reset. We should go. That's what we're doing, she said. They rode the elevator down in silence. In the lobby, Jinwoo moved ahead to the vehicle. For a moment, just a moment in the marble lobby with the security desk and the artificial light, they were side by side and neither of them was performing for anyone. Min-jae said quietly, without looking at her, if Do-hyun makes a move tonight, anything, stay beside me. Don't separate from me. Whatever he says, whatever he does. I know. I mean it, Zuri. It was the first time he had used her first name. She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead at the lobby doors. I know, she said again. They went out into the cold November night. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was exactly what Soo-yeon had described, and worse than Zuri had imagined. 400 people in a room designed to communicate power, the kind of room where the flower arrangements alone cost more than Zuri's monthly salary had been, where the lighting was engineered to make everyone look important, where the noise was the particular layered hum of people performing influence at each other. She'd been in rooms like this before in Chicago, smaller versions, corporate events she'd attended as floor staff rather than a guest, and she knew the register of it. She was in the room differently tonight. Min-jae's hand went to the small of her back as they entered, and this time it wasn't brief. It stayed. A deliberate visible claim. She understood it for what it was, and she also understood, with a clarity she'd been avoiding for days, that the warmth of it against her spine was not something she was neutral about. She kept her face composed. The first hour was navigation. Min-jae moved through the room with the controlled efficiency of a man who had attended events like this for 20 years and had developed an economy of motion for them. Brief conversations, precisely calibrated attention, the handshakes and nods and murmured exchanges of a person who understood that presence at an event like this was itself the communication. He introduced her to everyone. Each time, "My wife Zuri." Each time the two words landed like a statement of fact that wasn't interested in contradiction. She held her own. She had spent 3 days preparing names, relationships, the specific social topography of who mattered and why. The history between the various corporate board members and the careful distances between the legitimate and the less so. When she spoke with the contained assurance of someone who knew her ground. She watched people revise their initial assessment of her in real time, watched the question move behind their eyes, "Who is this woman?" and answered it not by explaining, but by simply being who she was. She found Do-hyun at the 40-minute mark. He found her first, technically. She felt him before she saw him, that specific awareness of being watched with professional attention, and turned to find him across the room with a glass of champagne and his open, pleasant face, and two people beside him she didn't recognize. He raised his glass slightly. She held his eyes for a moment. Then Min-jae said something to the man he was talking to, and his hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her back. He'd seen it too. It happened at the 2-hour mark. She had moved, briefly, deliberately, to get a glass of water from the service station at the edge of the room, Jinwoo 2 steps behind her. Min-jae was 15 feet away, engaged with a group that included 2 members of the National Assembly and the CEO of a shipping conglomerate, the kind of conversation he couldn't extract from quickly without consequences. She should have waited. She went. She was at the service station, her back to the room for 30 seconds. 30 seconds, she counted them later, she counted every single one. When Do-hyun appeared at her left. Not threatening, not aggressive, perfectly, precisely, social. "It's a beautiful event," he said. "It is," she said. "You've been impressive tonight." He said it conversationally, like a compliment. "Genuinely. I've been watching how you work a room. That's not a skill you learn in a year." "I'm not performing," she said. "No." He tilted his head slightly. "That's what's interesting." She turned to go. His hand, light, brief, on her arm. Not grabbing. Just enough. "I want to show you something," he said. "Before the evening is over. I think you deserve to see it." "I'm not interested." "I think you will be." His voice was still pleasant, still warm. But there was something underneath it now, the specific quality of a man who had arrived at the moment he'd been building toward. "I have documentation, Zuri, the transfer records, your account, the timing." A pause. "I know about your mother." The bottom dropped out of her stomach. She kept her face entirely still. "I don't know what you think you have," she said. "I think I have enough." He looked at her with something that was almost kind, almost regretful, the face of a man who had practiced this. "I don't want to use it. I want you to understand that. This isn't about you. You were in a desperate situation, and my cousin used that. That's on him, not you. Let go of my arm." He released immediately, stepped back, kept his voice low and level. "I'm going to give him one opportunity to step down from the inheritance claim voluntarily. Tonight. Before I present what I have to the board." A pause. "If he does, I'll destroy what I have. You go home. Your mother keeps the money. No one has to know anything." She looked at him. In his face, in that careful warmth, she could see exactly how much work had gone into this moment. The months of investigation, the legal strategy, the patience. She thought about what Min-jae had said. He's building alliances, and understood now that the alliances weren't the only thing he'd been building. "You should talk to Min-jae," she said. "I will," Do-hyun said. "In about 15 minutes. I wanted to talk to you first." He met her eyes. "Because I think you're a good person in a bad situation, and I think you should know what's coming." He walked away. She stood at the service station with a glass of water she hadn't drunk and felt the evening recalibrate around her, the room still bright and loud and full of people performing power at each other, everything exactly as it had been 20 seconds ago and completely different. She turned and found Min-jae's eyes across the room. He'd been watching. He'd seen the conversation even if he hadn't heard it. She moved back toward him, and the look on his face as she came close, the specific controlled tension in his jaw, the stillness that was a different kind of stillness from usual, told her he already knew something had shifted. "What did he say?" Min-jae said, low, not moving his mouth much. "He has the transfer records, the account. He knows about my mother." She felt him go very still beside her. A different stillness than the controlled social stillness. Something deeper, something that came from the part of him that had spent 20 years making operational decisions under pressure. "How certain," he said. He described it with specifics, enough to be real. She kept her voice level. "He's giving you 15 minutes to concede the inheritance voluntarily. If you don't, he presents it to the board. Here, tonight." Beside her, the corporate CEO said something and laughed, and Min-jae turned to him and produced a response that was socially perfect, not a crack in it, and she stood beside him and smiled at the right moment and thought, "This is falling apart. Right now, in this room, this is falling apart." The 15 minutes passed in a way that felt like they took an hour, and also like they took 30 seconds. At the 2-hour 15 mark, Do-hyun moved to the center of the room. He didn't use the microphone. He didn't need to. He simply raised his voice, not shouting, not dramatic, just the carrying tone of a man who had timed this to a moment when the ambient noise had dipped and the room was in one of its natural conversational pauses, and said, "I'd like to say something, if I may. As a member of the Kang family." The room shifted. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. Min-jae went completely still. Zuri felt his hand find hers in the space between them. Not for show, not for the room, just the press of his fingers against hers for 1 second, so brief she might have imagined it. She didn't imagine it. Do-hyun spoke clearly, with the warm regret of a man reluctantly revealing something he wished he didn't have to. He talked about the Kang family legacy, about their grandfather's wishes, about the importance of the marriage provision in the will. He talked about his profound respect for the institution of marriage, and his equally profound concern that the spirit of their grandfather's wishes was being honored. He talked about Zuri, not viciously. That was the thing. It would have been almost easier if it had been vicious. Instead, it was gentle, almost sympathetic, as he described an American woman in a medical crisis, a mother with cancer, a desperate financial situation. As he described an account that had received 48 hours after a courthouse ceremony, exactly $500,000. He had a document, projected on his phone, passed to the people nearest him. Transfer records, account numbers, dates. The room was very quiet. Zuri heard her own breathing. She heard someone near her say something in Korean, low, sharp, and heard the shift of bodies, the particular sound of a room full of powerful people recalculating. She heard from somewhere to her left a woman's voice say, in careful English, "Is that true?" The question landed in the silence and sat there. She felt the room's attention come to her. Not all of it, but enough. The eyes that turned to find her face, the assessment that moved through the space like a current, and she felt something inside her that was not quite humiliation and not quite fury, but was the specific searing quality of a private wound exposed in public. Her mother's illness and her own desperation laid out on this glossy floor in front of 400 people who didn't know her and owed her nothing. Her jaw locked. Her eyes burned. She did not cry. She would not cry in this room in front of these people. And then Min-jae moved. She felt it before she saw it. The quality of the air beside her changed. The controlled stillness broke into something else. And then his arm was around her waist, pulling her into him with a certainty that left no room for interpretation. And when she looked up, his face was close to hers and his eyes were not closed, not the ice dragon, not the man from the contract, something else entirely. He kissed her. Not quickly, not for performance, not the brief socially adequate gesture that a calculating man would use for this moment. He kissed her like someone who had been deciding something for a long time and had just decided, like someone choosing rather than performing. And she felt it move through her entire body like a current. And she kissed him back because she couldn't not, because whatever she'd been telling herself for 4 weeks evaporated in that moment completely. When he pulled back, his forehead was almost against hers for a second. Then he turned to face the room. He looked at Do-hyun. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that people had to strain to hear it, which was more effective than volume would have been. "She is my wife," he said. "And anyone who disrespects her disrespects me." The silence in the room was absolute. Do-hyun's expression had shifted, Just barely. Just the flicker of a man who had planned for most outcomes and was now recalculating one he hadn't fully weighted. The warm regret was still there, but there was something underneath it now, something tighter. Min-jae looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned back to the room. Not at anyone specific, just the room, the 400 people, the board members and the politicians and the associates, and he said, "I apologize for the interruption to the evening. Please continue." And somehow, impossibly, the room began to breathe again. Conversations restarted, slowly at first, then with gathering noise. Servers moved, someone laughed somewhere. The machinery of a social event reasserted itself because powerful people in expensive rooms have a powerful instinct to preserve the surface of things. Min-jae's hand was at her back again. Steady. Immovable. "Don't look at him," he said very low, just for her. Look straight ahead." "I'm looking straight ahead," she said. Her voice was remarkable, she thought. Completely steady. She had no idea how. "Are you all right? Are you?" A pause. "No," he said. "Neither am I," she said. They stood there together in the middle of the recovering room, and she was aware of his hand against her spine and the specific total wreckage of every wall she'd built between herself and this moment, and the fact that in approximately 20 seconds, when the immediate crisis had absorbed enough social oxygen, they would have to face what had just happened between them, and there would be no contract language available to explain it. What? They left 20 minutes later. Soo-yeon met them at the exit. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were moving fast, assessing, the look of a lawyer calculating damage. She fell into step beside them and said nothing until they were in the car, Jinwoo driving, the city moving past the windows. "The board members," Min-jae said. 3 of them spoke to Do-hyun after. "I don't know what was said." Soo-yeon's voice was precise, clinical. "Tae-young left early. That's significant." "How significant?" "Unclear yet. By morning, Do-hyun will have talked to all of them." His voice was flat. "He's been building to this for months. Tonight wasn't a spontaneous decision. He had those documents prepared. He had the moment planned." "Yes," Soo-yeon said. The car was quiet for a moment. "The contract," Zuri said. Both of them looked at her. "He showed transfer records and account numbers," she said. "He did not show the contract itself, which means either he doesn't have it or he's holding it." Soo-yeon's eyes sharpened. Holding it for a second strike. Or he genuinely doesn't have it, and everything tonight was built on financial circumstantial evidence, which is damaging but not conclusive. Zuri kept her voice level. "The question is what the board will do with what they saw tonight versus what they do with the actual contract document." Min-jae was looking at her. She didn't look at him. She looked at Soo-yeon. "The board has the authority to call an emergency session within 72 hours, Soo-yeon said carefully. "If Do-hyun petitions for a formal review of the inheritance conditions..." "He'll petition tonight," Min-jae said. "He has his phone. He's already drafted it." The car moved through the dark streets. Zuri thought about what she'd felt in the ballroom. The kiss. His forehead against hers for that 1 second. She thought about how carefully she'd been not thinking about it since they'd walked out of the Grand Hyatt, how completely that strategy was going to fail the moment she was alone in her suite. She thought about her mother. She thought about the divorce papers that were, contractually, waiting at the end of this year. She thought about what Min-jae had said in the car on the way home from the Kim dinner. "I haven't decided." She thought about the photograph from Busan, the 12-year-old boy. She thought, stop it. She thought, this is a crisis. You solve the crisis. You do not think about anything else. "The board session," she said. "If he petitions and the session is called..." "What do you need from me?" Min-jae's voice, when it came, was quieter than she expected. "Zuri, what do you need?" He looked at her. In the dark of the car, in the moving city light, his face was that thing again. The thing she'd seen in the study with the photograph, the thing she'd seen in the ballroom before he'd kissed her, open in the way a structure shows what it's made of when enough pressure is applied. "I need you to stay," he said, "through the board session. I need you present. I need..." He stopped. His jaw moved. "The board will not make a determination on the marriage's validity without assessing you directly. They'll question me." "Yes." "Under oath?" Effectively, she looked out the window. She thought about the 1-year contract, the divorce papers in the future, the exit clause, the 40% guarantee if she left now, $200,000 still in her mother's account, still enough, still real, regardless of what happened to Min Jae's empire. She thought about 200,000 versus 500,000. She thought about the figure she'd seen in the ballroom, the fear behind Do-hyun's eyes for just a second when Min Jae had spoken, the thing that had happened in that room that had nothing to do with the money or the inheritance or the contract or any of it. She thought about what it meant that she was no longer thinking about any of this in terms of the money. "I'll stay," she said. Min Jae's exhale was barely audible, but she heard it. "The session will be called for Saturday morning," Soo-yeon said. "That gives us 36 hours to—" "I need to talk to Zuri alone," Min Jae said. "Tonight." Soo-yeon looked at him, then at Zuri. "I'll send everything to your phone by midnight," she said, and went quiet. The car reached the building. They rode the elevator up in silence. The penthouse was dark except for the city light through the windows. Soo-yeon peeled off toward the lower floor. Min Jae and Zuri stood in the main room. He turned to her. She looked at him. 36 hours before a room full of people who held his empire in their hands would look at her and ask her to prove something that had started as a lie and had become, without her permission and without any provision in any contract she'd signed, something she no longer knew how to. He said her name. Not Ms. Bennett, not the careful formal distance he'd maintained for 5 weeks. Just her name. In the dark of the penthouse, with the city burning behind the windows and the ruin of the evening still in both their bodies like a vibration that hadn't finished yet. "Zuri," she looked at him. He was standing 6 feet away with his jacket off. She hadn't noticed when that happened, and his shirt slightly pulled from the movement of the evening, and his face was doing something she'd never seen it do. Not the stillness, not the measuring assessment, not the controlled professional composure he wore the way other men wore armor. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Before tomorrow. Before the board session. Before any of it." "Min Jae, let me say it." She stopped. He was quiet for a moment, just breathing. She could see the effort of it, the particular, almost physical effort of a man who had spent 20 years not saying things trying to say one. "The contract was real when I made it," he said. "Every word of it. I needed a signature. You needed money. The arrangement was transactional, and I intended it to stay that way." His jaw moved. "I told myself that clearly. I told myself every day." "I know. I don't think you do." He looked at her. "Because I was wrong. About the arrangement. About what it was going to be." A pause that cost him something. "About you." The room was very quiet. "That night in the study," he said, "with the photograph. You didn't say anything. You didn't perform sympathy. You didn't try to make it mean something you could use later. You just stood there and let it be what it was." His voice was low and rough at the edges in a way she'd never heard from him. "No one has done that since my grandfather died. No one has just let things be what they are." She could feel her heart. "The contract ends in 7 months," she said. Her voice was steady, which was an act of tremendous effort. "That's still true." "I know. And tomorrow there's a board session that could take your empire apart. That's also true." "I know." "So what are you telling me?" He looked at her across the 6 feet of dark air between them. "I'm telling you that when Do-hyun stood in that ballroom and put your mother's illness in front of 400 people, he said, what I felt was not a threat to the inheritance." His voice dropped further. "What I felt was—" He stopped. Started again. "I have been in dangerous situations my entire adult life. I have made decisions that cost people things I cannot give back. I have never, in any of it, felt what I felt in that room when I watched your face." She could not speak. "I don't know how to do this," he said. It came out stripped of everything, just the plain fact of it. "I don't know what this looks like. I have spent my entire life building walls because the last time I didn't have them, I was 16 years old, and they buried both my parents in the same week." His breath came out hard. I am not good at this." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you anyway." She crossed the 6 feet. She didn't think about it. She just moved, And then she was standing in front of him, close enough to see the line of tension along his jaw and the specific quality of his eyes in the city light, open, for once, genuinely open, the way they'd been for that 1 second in the ballroom before he'd pulled her in. And she put her hand against his chest, flat, over where his heart was, and felt it going as hard as hers. He put his hand over hers. They stood like that. "We have 36 hours, she said quietly. "Yes." "And you need to win that board session." "Yes." "Then that's what we do," she said. "We figure out the rest after." He looked down at her. Something moved through his face. Not quite relief, not quite pain. The particular expression of someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a long time and has just been told they don't have to carry it alone. He said her name again. This time, it was just a word. This time, it meant everything. Masom. They worked through the night. Su-yeon came back at midnight with her folio and her laptop and her immaculate, exhausted precision, and for the next 6 hours, the three of them sat at the kitchen table and dismantled every piece of what Do-hyun had presented and built the response from the wreckage. The transfer records were real. There was no disputing that. Su-yeon confirmed it with the focused candor she brought to bad news. $500,000, Zuri's account, 48 hours after the ceremony. The timing was damaging. The amount was damaging. Any board member with 2 functioning brain cells was going to look at those numbers and ask the question. "So we answer the question," Zuri said. Both of them looked at her. "We answer it directly. We don't deflect it, and we don't let Do-hyun's framing be the only framing." She looked at Min-jae. "What you paid me. Is there a legitimate structure you can put around it?" Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Su-yeon. "The prenuptial agreement," he said. Su-yeon's eyes sharpened. "It's not. It can be reconstructed as one. Retroactively documented." His voice was even. Operational. A substantial premarital asset transfer as part of a prenuptial financial arrangement is not unusual. It is not evidence of a purchased marriage. It is evidence of a financially protected one. "The timeline is tight," Su-yeon said. "How tight?" "We'd need the documentation completed and notarized before 9 a.m. Saturday. That's..." She checked her watch. 12 hours. "Then we have 12 hours, he said. Su-yeon was already opening a new document. Zuri watched Min-jae across the table, the operational mind moving, fast and precise, finding the structure in the wreckage, and thought about what he'd said in the main room an hour ago. "I have made decisions that cost people things I cannot give back." She thought about what it meant that the same mind that had built an empire through 20 years of ruthless determination was now using that precision in service of something that had nothing to do with power. She thought, "Don't." She thought, "You're already past don't." She picked up a pen and pulled Su-yeon's notepad toward her. "Tell me every question the board is likely to ask, and I'll tell you which ones I can answer and which ones I can't." Su-yeon looked at her for a second with an expression that was the closest thing to warmth Zuri had seen from her. Then she started talking, and they worked. At 4:30 in the morning, Min-jae's phone went off. He looked at it. His face did a thing, a specific, sudden thing, the stillness that meant bad news landing. And he stood and moved to the window and spoke in Korean for 45 seconds, his voice low and controlled. And then he ended the call. He turned. "Do-hyun got to Lee Byung-soo," he said. Su-yeon's face tightened. "The board chairman. He met with him tonight, after the gala." Min-jae's voice was flat. "Byung-soo has agreed to call the emergency session for 7 a.m. Saturday. Not 9. 7. Silence. "That's 2 hours less," Zuri said. "That's not the problem," Min-jae said. "Byung-soo calling the session personally means Do-hyun has his support. Not neutrality. Support." He looked at Su-yeon. "He's going into that room with the board chairman already on his side." Su-yeon was quiet for a moment. How many of the board are aligned with Do-hyun? Before tonight, 2, possibly 3. He set his phone down on the table with a precise, controlled movement that communicated exactly how much force he was restraining. "After tonight, with Byung-soo's position signaled? I don't know. The others will read it as momentum. They'll move toward whoever they think is going to win. Then we make sure they think that's you, Zuri said. He looked at her. You have the legitimate business case, she said. You have the legal structure we're building right now. You have the performance record of the last 14 months as chairman in everything but name. She kept her voice level and practical, the voice she'd learned to use when a production deadline collapsed and everyone else in the room was panicking. What we don't have is the narrative. Do-hyun has spent months building a story about you. The marriage, the timing, the money. That story is in everyone's head when they walk into that room. And we need a different story in their heads. She looked at him. What's the truth? Not the contract version, not the legal document version, the actual truth of where this is right now. The kitchen was very quiet. Min-jae held her eyes. He said, the truth is that an arrangement I made for strategic reasons became something else without my planning for it. The truth is that I'm standing in front of a board session in, he checked the time, 52 hours having spent the night rebuilding my legal defense, with a woman I am. He stopped. His jaw worked. Say it, Soo-yeon said quietly. He looked at Zuri. With a woman I love, he said. Flat, certain, like a fact rather than a confession. Whether or not that began as a contract. The word landed in the room and sat there. Zuri's chest did something complicated and painful, and she didn't look away from him. Then that's what you say, she said. In that room, to the board. You tell them the truth. The truth includes the contract. Yes. Admitting the contract, admitting it and having Do-hyun expose it are different things, she said. One is strategy. One is defeat. You walk in there and you say, yes, the arrangement began as a contractual one. My grandfather's will created a deadline. I found a solution. And then something I didn't plan for happened. She held his eyes. You let them see your face when you say it. The way I'm seeing it right now. Min-jae was still. That face, she said quietly. That's what wins the room. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said to Soo-yeon, finish the prenuptial documentation. I need to make 3 calls. He stood. And I need an hour with Zuri before we go in tomorrow. Alone. Soo-yeon nodded and didn't comment. Cut. Saturday morning came in gray and cold, the kind of soul dawn that felt like the city was withholding judgment. The car reached the Kyung Industries headquarters building at 6:45. The building was 40 stories of glass and steel in Yongdeung-po, the corporate heart of Min-jae's legitimate empire, the surface that covered everything else. Jin-woo pulled into the underground garage and they rode the executive elevator up in silence. Soo-yeon had the prenuptial documentation, completed, notarized at 5:30 a.m. by a legal team that had not slept, in the folio under her arm. Min-jae had his 3 calls behind him, his face recalibrated to something that was not quite the Ice Dragon composure and not quite the openness of 4 in the morning, something in between that she didn't have a name for yet. Zuri had a black dress, her spine straight, and 5 weeks of being Zuri Bennett in a city that had tried to make her feel small. She had more than enough. The boardroom was on the 38th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, a table that sat 16, chairs that communicated money. 8 board members were already seated when they came in. Byung-soo, 68, silver-haired, the particular stillness of a man who had just made a decision and was comfortable with it, was at the head of the table. Do-hyun was already there. He was seated to Byung-soo's left, which told Zuri everything she needed to know about the alignment. His face when Min-jae and Zuri came in was still, composed. The warmth dialed back. This was the Yale Law version of him, the version that had been waiting for this room. Min-jae took his seat at the opposite end from Byung-soo. Zuri sat to his right. She felt Do-hyun's eyes on her face, and she did not look at him. She looked at Byung-soo, who was the prize, and she kept her face open and steady and present. Byung-soo opened the session with the formal language of a man who had done this before. He outlined the reason for the emergency meeting, the questions raised at the gala regarding the validity of Min-jae's compliance with the inheritance conditions of the late Kang Sung-il's will. He noted, with careful neutrality, that Do-hyun had presented evidence warranting review. He turned to Do-hyun. Do-hyun spoke for 8 minutes. He was good. She had expected him to be good, and he was better. He presented the financial documentation with the calm authority of someone who had organized it specifically for this room. The transfer records, the timing, the amount. A brief summary of what his investigation had uncovered about Zuri's financial situation prior to the marriage. He did not characterize it viciously. He presented it as concerning questions rather than accusations, which was more effective and more dangerous. He said he had the deepest respect for Min Jae as a leader. He said he simply needed the board to be certain. When he finished, Byung-soo looked at Min Jae. Min Jae stood. He didn't have notes. He didn't look at Soo-yeon. He looked at the board members. One face, then the next, then the next. The way she'd seen him work a room at the gala, but different, more stripped, more direct. He said, Do-hyun is right. The room shifted. The marriage began as a contractual arrangement. I needed to satisfy the conditions of my grandfather's will within a deadline. I found a solution that was legal, mutually consented to, and practical. The financial transfer Do-hyun has documented is real. It occurred. I don't intend to deny it. He paused. What I intend to tell you is what happened after. He spoke for 12 minutes. She watched the board members' faces as he talked. Watched the recalibration happen in real time. The frown that softened on the face of the woman at the far end. The slight forward lean of the man to Byung-soo's right. Min Jae spoke with the flat, stripped-down honesty of someone who had decided that the performance was over, and that the truth was the only available ground. And the truth was this, that an arrangement made for strategy had become, without planning and without contract, something he had not experienced before and could not characterize as anything less than real. He looked at Zuri when he said it. The room followed his eyes to her face. She held it. She held the room's attention the way she'd held every difficult room in her life, without flinching, without performing, just being exactly who she was. Then Byung-soo said, Ms. Bennett, I have a question for you. Yes, she said. You entered this arrangement in a moment of significant personal crisis. You received a very large sum of money. His voice was neutral, measured. I need to ask you directly, is this marriage, as it exists today, genuine? The room was absolutely silent. Zuri looked at Byung-soo. She thought about her mother's hands on her face. You come home. She thought about the registry office and the cleaning solution smell and the 11 minutes. She thought about the kitchen table at 4 a.m. and Min Jae's voice saying, I love, flat, certain, like a fact. She thought about what genuine meant. She said, I came to Seoul for money. That's true, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because the people who needed that money are more important to me than my pride. She held Byung-soo's eyes. What I did not come to Seoul for, and what I did not plan for, and what is as real as anything I have ever experienced, is him. She did not gesture toward Min Jae. She didn't need to. You can question the beginning of this. The beginning was transactional. But you are not assessing the beginning. You are assessing what is sitting at this table right now. And what is sitting at this table right now is not a contract. Silence. Byung-soo held her eyes for a long moment. Then he looked down at the folio in front of him and made a notation. Do-hyun said, from his end of the table, his voice careful and controlled. With respect, how does the board distinguish between a convincing performance and the genuine article? Zuri turned and looked at him directly for the first time since they'd come into the room. She said, the same way anyone does. You decide what you believe. Do-hyun's jaw tightened. Min Jae stood. I'd like to introduce additional documentation, he said. A prenuptial financial agreement completed prior to this session, establishing the legal framework for the asset transfer in question. He nodded to Soo-yeon, who placed the folio on the table and slid it toward Byung-soo. I would also like to address directly the question of Do-hyun's investigation and the means by which he obtained the financial records he presented this morning. Do-hyun went very still. The account records Do-hyun presented were obtained through a third-party data service operating in violation of Korean financial privacy statutes, Min Jae said. His voice had shifted back to the operational register, cold, precise, each word placed with surgical accuracy. Soo-yeon has filed the relevant documentation with the FSS this morning. The investigation into how those records were obtained is now a matter of legal record. The room went very quiet. Do-hyun. Min-jae looked at his cousin across the length of the table. You have spent 14 months building toward this moment. You have built alliances. You have gathered evidence. You have been patient, and you have been strategic, and I am telling you, in front of this board, that you have built all of it on methods that will not survive legal scrutiny. Do-hyun's face was controlled. Barely. The board has a decision to make, Min-jae continued. They can review the documentation Soo-yeon has filed. They can assess the prenuptial agreement. They can consider the testimony given in this room this morning. A pause. Or they can continue to assess the narrative that Do-hyun has constructed with illegally obtained evidence. Byung-soo was looking at the prenuptial documentation. He was reading. The room held its breath. Do-hyun said, his voice tight at the edges for the first time. The prenuptial agreement was completed last night, after the gala, after the exposure. The timing is documented and notarized, Soo-yeon said calmly. Completed at 5:17 a.m. today, in compliance with applicable statutes. The timing is not in question. It's convenient, Do-hyun said. Many legal documents are. Soo-yeon met his eyes without blinking. Convenience is not a legal objection. Do-hyun's hands, flat on the table in front of him, pressed down slightly. She watched his fingers whiten at the tips. The composure was still there. The Yale law training was still there. But underneath it, the architecture of the last 14 months was making a sound that buildings make when the load shifts. Byung-soo looked up from the documentation. He looked at Min-jae. He looked at Zuri. He looked at Do-hyun. He said, I'd like a 30-minute recess. They waited in a glass-walled conference room on the same floor. Min-jae stood at the window. Soo-yeon sat with her laptop and did not speak. Jin-woo was outside the door. Zuri sat in a chair and looked at her hands. She thought about what she'd said in that room. What is sitting at this table right now is not a contract. She thought about how completely true that was and what it was going to cost her when the year ended. If the year ended the way it was supposed to, if the contract expired and the divorce papers materialized and the life she'd built in this city in these 5 weeks was just... Min-jae turned from the window. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair, which she had not expected. The physical lowering of it, the deliberate drop from his height to hers, and looked up at her from that position with his face entirely open. Whatever happens in the next 30 minutes, he said. Don't. Zuri, don't tell me it'll be okay. You don't know that. I know, he said. I wasn't going to say that. A pause. I was going to say whatever happens in the next 30 minutes. I meant what I said last night. That doesn't change based on what the board decides. She looked at him. She looked at his face, the face she'd been studying for 5 weeks without admitting she was studying it, the particular quality of his attention and the line of his jaw and the way his eyes held hers with that absolute focused presence that had nothing evasive in it anymore. She said, You told the room the truth. All of it. Yes. The contract, the arrangement, everything. Yes. You could lose the inheritance. If the board decides the conditions weren't met in good faith, I know. Then why? Because you were right, he said. In the car, after the Kim dinner. You said there's a difference between an employee and a wife. His voice was steady and rough and certain. I am done treating you like the first thing. Her throat ached. She put her hand against the side of his face. He closed his eyes for 1 second, just one. Then his phone went off. He looked at it. He stood. They're ready, he said. She stood beside him. They walked back to the boardroom together, side by side. And when they came through the door, she could read nothing from Byung-soo's face, nothing from any of the board members' faces, and Do-hyun was looking at the table in front of him with an expression she couldn't fully parse. Byung-soo said, The board has reached a preliminary determination. And the room, Byung-soo said, The board has reached a preliminary determination. The room held. Zuri could hear her own pulse. She could feel Min-jae beside her, not touching, just present, the specific heat of a person standing close enough that the air between them had a quality. And she kept her eyes on Byung-soo's face and waited. Byung-soo set down the prenuptial documentation. He looked at it for 1 more second, then looked up at the room. The board finds that the conditions of the late Kang Sung-il's will have been met. His voice was measured, each word placed with the deliberate weight of a man who understood the consequences of language. The marriage of Kang Min-jae and Zuri Bennett is legally documented, publicly established, and, on the evidence presented this morning, not grounds for contesting the inheritance provisions. He paused. The preliminary challenge is dismissed. The exhale that moved through the room was almost audible. Zuri looked at the table in front of her and breathed once, slowly, through her nose. Do-hyun did not move. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his face composed and entirely, terribly still, and she watched him receive the determination with the particular internal quality of someone absorbing a blow they had known was possible and had not fully believed would come. The warmth was gone. The Yale law precision was gone. What was left was a 31-year-old man sitting at a table where 14 months of work had just been dismissed in 2 sentences. And the face he wore in that moment was the most honest she had ever seen him. Byung-soo was not finished. Additionally, he said, and his voice shifted slightly, still measured, but with a different register underneath. The board has reviewed the documentation filed this morning regarding the means by which certain financial records were obtained and presented to this session. He looked at Do-hyun directly. The board takes a serious view of the methods described. We will be requesting a full internal review of Do-hyun's conduct over the past 14 months, including his engagement with third-party data services operating outside legal parameters. That review will be conducted by outside counsel, and the findings will determine his standing within the organization. Do-hyun's jaw tightened, just barely. This session is adjourned, Byung-soo said. The room cleared with the particular efficiency of people who had been present at something significant and wanted to process it somewhere else. Do-hyun stood. He gathered nothing. He had brought nothing. And he moved toward the door, and he might have made it out without a word. And something about that possibility made Zuri stand and say his name. He stopped. He turned. They looked at each other across the emptying room. Min-jae was speaking quietly with Soo-yeon near the windows. Byung-soo was gone. They were nearly alone. And Do-hyun's face was, for the first time, entirely unmanaged. "You knew it was over when he tore up the framing," she said. "In the boardroom, when he admitted the contract himself." Do-hyun looked at her. "Yes, you built everything on the exposure, on being the one to reveal it." She kept her voice quiet, not cruel, just factual. "When he took that away from you, you had evidence without narrative." "Evidence is usually enough," he said. "Not when the person you're building the case against stands up and tells the truth before you can." She held his eyes. "You didn't plan for that." His jaw moved. "No," he said. "I didn't." Something passed between them. Not warmth, not forgiveness, not anything that could be named easily. The recognition of 2 people who had been in the same room for the same stakes and had come out on different sides of it. "I genuinely believe I was the better choice for this organization," he said. And the thing that made her chest ache slightly was that she believed he believed it. "I still do." "That might be true," she said, "but that's not what today was about." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Take care of him. He doesn't know how to ask for that." He walked out. She watched the door close behind him and stood there for a moment with that sentence in her chest, the specific weight of it, the unexpected generosity buried inside the concession of a man who had just lost everything he'd built toward. Min-jae appeared at her shoulder. "What did he say?" he said. "Something true," she said. He looked at the door. His face was unreadable in the way that was different now from the old unreadability. Not closed, just quiet. Processing. "It's done," Soo-yeon said from behind them. She had her phone in her hand, already moving to the next thing. "The formal documentation will be filed by end of business today. The inheritance is secure. The internal review of Do-hyun's conduct will take 6 to 8 weeks, and I expect the findings will effectively—" She stopped, looked at both of them. "You should go home," she said. "Both of you. I'll handle everything from here." Min-jae looked at her. "Soo-yeon." "Go home, Min-jae," she said, and the warmth in it was real and brief and then gone again under the professionalism. "I've been doing this job for 9 years. Go home, boss." They didn't talk in the car. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. And the morning had used up something in both of them. And sometimes the truest thing is silence that doesn't need to be filled. Jinwoo drove. Seoul moved past the windows in the gray November morning, the city indifferent and enormous, and exactly what it had been before the boardroom and the gala and the registry office and all of it. The Han River visible to the south as they crossed into Gangnam, the tower blocks and the traffic, and the particular quality of this city's light that Zuri had spent 5 weeks learning to read. She looked at it. She thought, I know this city now. Not all of it, not even most of it, but the shape of the neighborhood, the rhythm of the streets, the way the light changed over the river in the late afternoon. The convenience store on the corner 2 blocks from the building where the woman behind the counter had started nodding at her by the 3rd week. The park where she ran sometimes when the building gym felt too enclosed. The restaurant where Haya Jin had taken her for lunch once. A small place with no English menu where Zuri had pointed at what the woman at the next table was eating. And it had been the best thing she'd tasted since she'd arrived. She thought, I know this place. She thought, I am not ready to leave this place. She pressed the thought down and looked at the river. Back in the penthouse, in the kitchen, in the ordinary light of a Saturday morning that had been something else entirely 6 hours ago, Min-jae made coffee. She watched him do it. The specific, deliberate way he moved through this task. The same precision he brought to everything, but quieter now. The precision of a man performing a small domestic action in his own home rather than a leader performing authority. And something about the ordinariness of it undid her slightly. He set a cup in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it. They sat at the kitchen counter and drank coffee and said nothing for a while. And the silence was the good kind. The kind that means 2 people are comfortable enough to be quiet together, which is a thing that takes longer to build than conversation and means more. My mother's second treatment cycle starts Monday, Zuri said eventually. I know. He looked at his cup. Soo-yeon forwarded me the treatment schedule you sent her when you arrived. She looked at him. You've been following her treatment. I've been... He paused. I wanted to know how it was going. She didn't say anything. She's responding well, he said. The coordinator's reports have been positive. How do you know what the coordinator's reports say? A pause. Soo-yeon has a contact at the medical center, not for surveillance. I asked for updates because... He stopped. His jaw moved. Because it mattered to you, and things that mattered to you started mattering to me, and I did not know what to do with that, except to pay attention to it. The kitchen was very quiet. Zuri set down her cup. Min-jae, she said. He looked at her. I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer me honestly. Yes. When the year ends, she said. The contract expiration. The divorce papers. She held his eyes. What were you going to do? He was quiet for a long moment. Honor it, he said. I was going to honor it, the way I said I would in the beginning. His voice was even, but there was something under it. I told myself that every day for 5 weeks. That the arrangement was what it was, and at the end of the year you would go home, and I would have what I needed, and it would be... He stopped. Sufficient. And now, he said, I sat in front of 8 board members this morning and told the truth about what this is. And the truth is that there is no version of the end of that year in which I am willing to watch you leave. His voice was not dramatic. It was just a fact. So the question is what we do about that. She looked at him across the kitchen counter. She thought about the woman who had gotten on the plane at O'Hare 5 weeks ago with a suitcase and a contract, and the absolute certainty that she was making a transaction, not a choice. She thought about who that woman was versus who was sitting in this kitchen right now with coffee going cold in her hands. She thought they were the same woman. She thought they were completely different. She said, the contract still exists, legally. Yes, and the divorce papers are already drafted. Soo-yeon told me that in week 1. Yes. So if you want to change that, I want to change that. You have to actually change it, not just say it in a kitchen on a Saturday morning after a crisis that made everything feel urgent. He looked at her steadily. I know the difference between a crisis decision and a real one. I know you do. She held his eyes. I'm asking you to make sure this is the second kind. He stood up from the counter. He came around to her side and he stood in front of her, and this was different from the boardroom and different from last night and different from the ballroom at the gala. This was just a kitchen in the morning with cold coffee and ordinary light. No performance required, no audience, no stakes except the actual ones. He took her face in both hands. He looked at her with that open, unguarded quality that she had watched emerge over 5 weeks from behind everything he'd built to keep people out, and she felt it land the way it always landed. Like a hand against a bruise, like something that hurt because it was real. "This is the second kind," he said. She put her hands over his. "Okay," she said. He exhaled. She felt it against her forehead, warm and unsteady, the breath of a man putting down something very heavy. "Okay," she said again, quietly. She called her mother that afternoon. Gloria picked up on the second ring, the way she always did, and said, "Tell me," before Zuri had said anything past hello, because Gloria Bennett had always been able to read her daughter across any distance. Zuri sat on the terrace with the city spread out below and the November air cold against her face, and she told her mother most of it. Not all of it. The parts that mattered. She told her that the legal situation that had been threatening the contract was resolved. She told her that she was safe. She told her that the treatment money was completely secure, untouchable, not connected to anything that had happened this morning or last night. And then she told her the rest, not in the polished, composed language she usually used. In the halting, unfinished language of someone saying something they haven't said out loud yet and discovering what it sounds like as they say it. Gloria listened without interrupting, which was unusual, which meant she was listening hard. When Zuri finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "A criminal organization," Gloria said. "A complicated man," Zuri said, "who built something I don't entirely understand and don't entirely approve of, and who has—" She looked at the city. "He has been more honest with me than most people I've known my whole life." Another silence. "You love him," Gloria said. Zuri was quiet. "You didn't say it," her mother said, "but you're quiet in the way you're quiet when something is true and you're not ready to be told it. Ma, I'm your mother. I know you're quiet." Zuri pressed her hand against her own chest and felt her heart under her palm, steady and real and complicated and absolutely certain. "Yes," she said. Gloria let out a breath. It was not a happy sound or an unhappy one. It was the sound of a woman receiving information and deciding what to do with it. "Bring him to Chicago," she said finally. "Ma, not to interrogate him. I'm not capable of that right now anyway. I'm in week 1 of a treatment protocol." The dry humor of it, the specific, indestructible Gloria Bennett humor that had survived everything life had thrown at her. "I want to see his face. That's all." Zuri laughed, and it came out smaller and shakier than she intended. "I'll ask him," she said. "You'll tell him," Gloria said. "There's a difference." After she hung up, Zuri sat on the terrace for a long time, looking at Seoul, and let herself feel all of it. The exhaustion and the relief and the complicated, unexpected weight of a happiness she hadn't planned for and didn't entirely know what to do with yet. She let herself feel it without pushing it down or naming it prematurely or building any structure around it. She just sat with it. That was enough for now. The weeks after the board session were different. Not immediately. The days after were still dense with legal work, with Soo-yeon's ongoing management of the internal review, with the careful process of Do-hyun's removal from influence that happened not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow, documented, irrevocable way that real power shifts happen, one provision and one board resolution at a time. Do-hyun did not contest it. He was, Soo-yeon reported 3 weeks later, in the process of establishing his own independent consultancy. The internal review had found 3 violations significant enough to end his organizational standing. He had accepted the findings. He had not, to anyone's surprise or otherwise, made any further public statements about the marriage. Min-jae heard the final report in the study one evening while Zuri was in the kitchen teaching herself to make kimchi jjigae with the patient, opinionated assistance of Mr. O. And when he came in and she looked at his face, she could read it. "Done?" she asked. "Done," he said. Mr. O pushed a bowl of something toward him without being asked, and Min-jae sat on the kitchen stool and ate it, and the 3 of them occupied the kitchen together in the comfortable, specific quiet of people who had shared a space long enough to know how to be in it. After, Zuri said, "I told my mother about you." Min-jae looked up from his bowl. "She wants to meet you," Zuri said. "When the treatment cycle is stable enough for travel, she's going to be in Chicago for the next phase." He held her eyes. "She said I should tell you, not ask you." Zuri raised an eyebrow slightly. Those were her exact words. Something moved through his expression, something she would have missed in the early weeks, something that only registered now that she knew how to read him. Emotion, quickly held steady. "Then I'll go," he said. "She'll interrogate you." "I know." "She's relentless. I've dealt with syndicate elders," he said. "I think I can manage one woman in a hospital room." "You've never met my mother." He looked at her with something that was almost a smile. Not quite, not yet, but the specific quality of expression that she had come to understand was his version of it. The thing that lived at the edge of his face when something broke through the composure, and he let it. "No," he said. "I haven't. Chat." The contract expired on a Tuesday. Zuri knew the date. She had always known the date. She'd marked it in her head from the day she signed, the way you mark an endpoint, the way the mind insists on knowing where the door is even when you're not planning to use it. She woke that morning in the suite she'd occupied for a year and lay in the gray morning light and thought, today is the day. She thought about this woman who had arrived at Incheon Airport with a rolling suitcase and a carry-on, and Jin Woo's neutral face waiting on the other side of the gate. She thought about the registry office and the cleaning solution smell and the 11 minutes. She thought about the kitchen table at 4 in the morning and the photograph from Busan and the ballroom and the boardroom and all the rooms in between. She thought about how a year could be a container for an entire life if you let it. She got up, she showered, she dressed. She went to the kitchen and Mr. O was already there with strong opinions about breakfast, and she ate what he put in front of her, and she thought, the divorce papers are in Soo-yeon's office. They have been there for a year. That is today's fact. She was still sitting at the counter when Min-jae came in. He looked at her. She looked at him. He knew the date, too. He sat across from her and didn't say anything for a moment. Mr. O, with the instinct of a man who had navigated this household's emotional weather for years, produced coffee and made himself very busy somewhere else. Soo-yeon called me this morning, Min-jae said. The papers. Yes. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. And? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He set something on the counter between them. It was a torn piece of paper. Several torn pieces, actually. Not cleanly torn, but decisively torn. The specific destruction of someone who had done it quickly and without hesitation. She could see the edge of a typed paragraph, the corner of a legal header, the end of a signature line. She looked at the pieces. She looked at him. I tore them up this morning, he said, before you woke up. I drove to Soo-yeon's office at 6 a.m., and I took them out of the file, and I tore them in the parking garage. Min-jae? She was very calm about it, he said. She said she'd been expecting it. She said, the corner of his expression moved. She said she'd drafted the alternative paperwork 3 weeks ago because she knows me. Zuri looked at the torn paper on the counter. What's the alternative paperwork? She said. He held her eyes. A real marriage, he said. Not a contract. Not a year. Not a provision in anyone's will. His voice was level and certain, and stripped of everything except the thing itself. You. Here. Because you choose to be. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the windows, Seoul was doing what it always did. Enormous and indifferent and alive. The Han River catching the morning light. The city moving without apology through another day. She thought about Chicago, her apartment, which she'd sublet for the year, which was probably still waiting for her with its drafty windows and the coffee shop on the corner, and the lake in all its moods and the flat, specific sky of a Midwestern city she had loved her whole life. She thought about this kitchen. She thought about Mr. O's opinions about breakfast. She thought about the park 2 blocks away and the woman at the convenience store who nodded at her. She thought about her mother, who was 2 weeks into her 3rd treatment cycle, whose most recent call had included the oncologist's words cautiously optimistic and Gloria's words, I've been cautiously optimistic about things my whole life and most of them worked out, so. She thought about a 12-year-old boy in a photograph taken in Busan. She thought about a man crouching in front of her chair in a glass-walled conference room saying, "Whatever happens, I meant what I said." She looked at Kong Min-jae across the kitchen counter in the ordinary morning light with the torn divorce papers between them and a year of everything they'd become to each other sitting in the air. She thought, this is not a transaction. She thought, this has not been a transaction for a very long time. "I want a real one," she said. Something moved through his face, the full version of the almost smile, finally, all the way through, and it changed his face completely, and she thought she would spend a long time learning to draw all the ways that face could look when it wasn't guarded. She thought she had time to do that. "I also want to go to Chicago," she said, "in 3 weeks, when the next treatment cycle starts. I want you to meet her properly, not in a hospital room if she's well enough. She'll want to take us somewhere. She'll have opinions about where." "I'll be there," he said. "She'll ask you difficult questions. I'll answer them. She'll ask you about the organization." A pause. "I'll answer that too." She looked at him. "Honestly?" "Yes. She won't like all of it." "I know." His eyes were steady. "Neither do you." She breathed. "No," she said. "I don't." The silence that followed was not the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of two people acknowledging something difficult and choosing to stay in the room with it anyway, which is different, which is harder, which is the only kind of choice that means anything. "We're going to have to talk about it," she said. "The organization, what it is, what you're willing to change." "I know." "Not today." "No," he said. "Not today." "But it's a conversation." "It is," he said. "A real one, whatever that costs." She looked at the torn papers on the counter. She thought about cost, what she'd come here willing to pay, and what she'd ended up paying instead. Not the year of her life, not the performance, not the contract compliance, but the walls she'd built around the part of herself that felt things she couldn't afford to feel, and how those walls had come down room by room without her permission, through 11 minutes in a registry office and a kitchen at 4 in the morning, and a man crouching in front of her chair who had told the truth in front of everyone because she told him to. She thought, some prices are worth it. She swept the torn pieces off the counter into her palm, held them for a moment. Then she set them down and reached across and took his hand, and he turned his palm up under hers the way she'd noticed he always did when she reached for him. The small, instinctive accommodation of someone learning to let people in. They sat like that in the kitchen with the city behind them and the morning still going, ordinary and irreversible. After a while, Mr. O reappeared, surveyed them both with the particular expression of a man who had seen a great deal in this household and had opinions about all of it, and without a word put 2 more cups of coffee on the counter and went back to whatever he'd been doing. Zuri looked at the coffee. She looked at Min-jae. She said, "Tell me about Busan. Before the photograph, what was it like?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. And she listened, really listened, the way she'd stood in that dark doorway and let things be what they were. And outside the windows, Seoul went on being itself, vast and cold and full of a million stories that would never be told. And in a kitchen on the 38th floor of a tower in Gangnam-gu, 2 people who had found each other through desperation and contracts and the particular cruelty of impossible circumstances sat together in the morning light and began, slowly and without ceremony, to tell each other the truth. That was how it started. That was also how it ended. Not with a flourish or a declaration or anything. The 400 people in the Grand Hyatt ballroom would have recognized as significant. Just 2 people, a kitchen, the truth. And enough time, finally, to do something real with it, fade out,